I was recently looking through a technical manual for a mid-century Boeing aircraft.
Okay.
And what struck me wasn't the complexity, not at all. It was the absolute, the unapologetic clarity of the language.
Fluff.
There was no equity statement in the preface. There was only the cold, hard math of structural integrity. It operated on this silent universal contract.
Right.
If the math is right, the plane stays up. If the math is wrong, people die. Simple as that.
A very clear set of stakes.
Exactly. But lately, that contract feels like it's being shredded in real time. We've all seen the headline.
Yeah, the door plug blowing out of a commercial jet mid-flight.
Or, on a totally different front, the elite university president unable to define basic moral boundaries during a congressional hearing.
And at first glance, you think they're separate issues, right? It just glitches.
One's an engineering failure, the other's a culture failure. We treat them as accidents or, PR nightmares.
But they're not.
If you look closer at the internal memos, the hiring shifts within these places. A much more unsettling pattern emerges. I spoke with a senior engineer at a major aerospace firm, and he described a quiet rot in the boardroom.
A quiet rot.
He told me that for the first time in his 30-year career, the main topic of high-level meetings wasn't the tolerance levels of a titanium wing spar.
Which is what it should be about.
That's all it should be about. Instead, it was the demographic composition of the team building it. He looked exhausted almost, detached.
Imagine.
And he told me, the physics hasn't changed, but the people in charge of the physics have stopped caring about the answer.
Observation.
And it suggests we aren't just dealing with a few bad hires or some, temporary bout of corporate wokeness.
Oh, it's deeper.
We are witnessing what I call civilizational entropy. It's the terminal phase of a society where the pursuit of excellence has been replaced by a system that is actively hostile to competence itself.
So we're trading, the hierarchies of merit?
For a tyranny of the mediocre, a system where the safest way to keep your job is to prioritize ideological conformity over the ability to, keep the planes in the sky.
And when the gatekeepers of our most vital systems, medicine, aviation law, when they decide that standards are a barrier to inclusion.
They aren't just being progressive. They are making a down payment on a blood debt that reality will eventually come to collect.
But I think that term you use, civilizational entropy, is exactly the right frame for what we have in front of us today.
It feels right.
We aren't here to discuss politics in the, the traditional sense of left versus right. We are here to look at the mechanics of institutional failure. We are examining what the sources are calling the competence crisis.
And to do that, we have pulled together a stack of reports that is, frankly, a little terrifying. We've got data from congressional hearings on the military, financial risk assessments from London University, and the Bank for International Settlements.
And deep sociological proceedings from the New College of Florida, a real cross-section.
Yeah, and the mission of this deep dive is to see if we can actually measure this entropy.
Is it just an anecdote here and there, or is it systemic? We are going to look at 3 specific sectors.
The military, financial markets, and the university system.
3 pillars of a modern society.
3 stories, 3 sectors, but really one single pattern.
The replacement of merit with ideology.
So let's get right into the first pillar of this crisis, the erosion of strategic deterrence.
The military.
I heard a story recently from a retired recruiter out of Fort Bragg that, it really highlights the shifting tides in our defense landscape.
Okay.
He spoke about a young man named Elias, a 3rd-generation soldier. His lineage was built on grueling, objective standards, the 85th merit-based fitness and technical exams.
So the real deal, his family lived and breathed this stuff.
Elias grew up with the aim high philosophy, but when he sat across the desk from the current brass, the conversation wasn't about his high-altitude flight scores or his mechanical aptitude.
Yes, it was about something else entirely.
He was handed a stack of modules focused on inclusive climate assessments. And he watched as peers, guys who struggled with basic tactical coordination, were fast-tracked into leadership roles to meet specific demographic targets. Elias eventually walked away. He chose a private tech firm over the service his grandfather loved.
You can't blame him.
And it's a chilling thought when you realize that strategic deterrence isn't just about the size of the fleet.
No, it's about the razor-sharp competence of the people operating it.
Exactly. As someone who analyzes global shifts, I find this trend deeply unsettling. We're trading the warrior's edge for a checklist.
And in a near-peer conflict, physical laws and technical precision, they don't care about our ideological intentions.
It's a hard truth to swallow. But pretending the readiness gap isn't widening is its own kind of danger.
You know, that story about Elias, it really resonates because it personalizes a massive data set we have here from the Daily Signal and Congress.gov.
It puts a face to the numbers.
As we often hear about wokeism in the military as this, culture war talking point. But when you look at the raw numbers, it translates into a staggering loss of operational time.
You're talking about the man hours. I saw that figure in the report and I had to double check it.
It's real. General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, confirmed in a Senate hearing that the Department of Defense expended 5,359,311 man-hours on Secretary Austin's extremism stand-down. Not even close. On top of that, an additional 529,711 man-hours on DEI-specific training.
I want to stick a pin in that number because it just washes over you if you're not careful. 5.3 million hours.
It's an abstract number.
So I did some back-of-the-napkin math on this. If you have a standard 40-hour work week, 5.3 million man-hours is roughly the equivalent of 2,500 people working full-time for an entire year.
Imagine an entire brigade-size element doing nothing but clicking through PowerPoint slides for 12 months.
And we aren't talking about training on how to clear a room.
No.
Or how to fix a jam turbine or advanced land navigation.
This is time spent defining terms like microaggression or unconscious bias. And this brings us to a core concept in economics: opportunity cost.
Right. There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
And the trade-off here is zero-sum. You cannot spend that hour on the rifle range and in the seminar room. It's one or the other.
And for a pilot, flight hours are oxygen. For a mechanic, time on the engine is everything. If you aren't doing the job, your skills are actively degrading.
So this isn't just wasted time in some, abstract bureaucratic sense. It is an active degradation of the lethal skill set required to win a war.
So what was the return on investment for those 5 million hours?
Yeah.
The justification was that they needed to root out white supremacy and extremism in the ranks.
Yeah, I remember the narrative after January 6th. The claim was that the military was teeming with hidden insurgents.
So they launched this massive hunt. What did they find?
Well, the data from the Center for American Institutions at Arizona State University tells a very different story. They looked at the actual results. Out of a total force of 2.1 million personnel, the extremism stand-down in 2020 located roughly 100 individuals.
100. Out of 2.1 million.
100.
That's statistically negligible. It's a rounding error.
The DoD's own study called it rare but dangerous, to be fair. But the response, this massive bureaucracy.
The Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion.
And all the various other bodies. It seems completely disproportionate to the actual measured threat.
So the solution was 1,000 times bigger than the problem.
And the ASU report highlights a secondary effect that is perhaps even more damaging than the lost hours.
Which is the erosion of trust.
The Eyes and Ears program.
Yes. The training encourages service members to monitor their peers for concerning behaviors or, microaggressions.
You're turning teammates into informants.
In a military unit, your life, your literal survival, depends on absolute unconditional trust in the person to your left and your right.
E pluribus unum. Out of many, one.
But these programs effectively flip that on its head. It becomes out of one, many. It creates a culture of suspicion where you aren't looking at your brother in arms as a teammate, but as a potential oppressor or extremist.
That completely destroys unit cohesion. If I'm worried that you're going to report me for a joke I made 3 years ago, am I going to trust you with my life in a firefight?
Yes. And cohesion is the secret sauce of combat effectiveness. Yeah. It's the psychological force multiplier. If you dissolve that in an acid of suspicion, the entire structure of the unit just crumbles.
And this all leads us to the recruitment paradox, which was mentioned in the A-Invest source. Right. The military is struggling badly to fill the ranks. They had a slight bump in 2024, but the long-term trend is, it's alarming.
And it's not just about people not wanting to join anymore. It's that people aren't even able to join. The source notes that only 23% of American youth currently meet the physical, academic, and health standards required for service.
23%? That's the entire pool they have to fish from.
So you have a shrinking pool of qualified candidates. And what's the response?
You'd think it would be to double down on finding the best within that 23%.
But instead, the Army has recently dropped physical and aptitude requirements just to meet their numbers. The focus has shifted from the warrior ethos to creating inclusive environments to try and attract a broader demographic.
And that connects directly back to the Elias story. If you are a high performer and you see the standards being lowered to accommodate people who can't meet them, the prestige of the institution collapses. You don't want to be on an elite team that isn't elite anymore.
That is the competence crisis in a nutshell. High performers leave, or they don't even bother to join, and they're replaced by individuals who are only there because the standards were lowered to let them in.
And we're seeing this ideological capture most acutely in the places that are supposed to be the bedrock of military leadership.
The service academies. West Point, the Naval Academy.
The ASU report went into detail on this. They mentioned the removal of duty, honor, country from the mission statement at West Point.
Now, they said it's still the motto, to be clear.
It is, but changing the core mission statement matter. It's a signal of a deeper shift.
It's more than just symbols, though. Look at the hiring practices for the faculty. The Naval Academy now requires diversity statements for faculty searches.
So let's just walk through what that means. You're hiring a professor of, say, quantum physics or naval history.
Right, a subject matter expert.
But you aren't just judging them on their mastery of physics or history. You are judging them on their demonstrated contribution to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So a world-class physicist who couldn't care less about DEI might get passed over for a mediocre physicist who writes a great diversity statement.
That is the logical and, in fact, the intended outcome of the policy.
And when you apply that filter to your hiring process over 10 or 20 years, the collective IQ and competence of the institution necessarily degrades.
The sources describe the military becoming a laboratory for social experimentation.
And the problem is, as the source points out, our near-peer competitors, China, Russia, they are not doing this.
No. They are focused on one thing and one thing only.
Lethality. Strategic deterrence relies on the enemy believing you are more competent, more capable, and more dangerous than they are.
If we trade that warrior's edge for a checklist of social goals, we are risking catastrophic failure in a conflict where, as you said, the laws of physics will not care about our good intentions.
It's a terrifying prospect. And what's worse is that this pattern isn't confined to the military. It's bleeding into the very engine of our economy.
Which brings us to our second pillar, the silent liquidation of financial markets.
This is where the entropy moves from the battlefield to the balance sheet.
I was reading a forum post from a mid-level analyst at a major Manhattan investment firm, let's call him Mark, who described what he termed the silent liquidation.
The silent liquidation, what did he mean by that?
Well, Mark's job was to oversee a massive pension fund, retirement money for teachers, firefighters.
The kind of money you can't afford to lose.
Exactly. But he found himself being forced by mandates from the top to divest from high-performing energy and manufacturing sectors.
Why? Why would you sell your best-performing assets?
Because they didn't hit the mandatory ESG scores.
Environmental, social, governance?
Right. And instead, he was directed to pump that capital into green startups that lacked any viable path to profitability. But, and this is the key, they possessed perfect ideological credentials.
So he was forced to sell winners and buy losers.
He watched the numbers turn red in real time, knowing that the retirees depending on this money were being sacrificed at the altar of a social experiment.
That's gut-wrenching.
He called it a classic case of the tyranny of the mediocre in finance. When we stop prioritizing ROI, return on investment, and start prioritizing compliance.
We aren't just shifting values, we are misallocating the very resources that keep civilization running.
And watching this from a journalistic perspective, you can't help but feel a sense of impending fragility.
Of course.
While the goal of a more sustainable world is noble, forcing it through a bureaucratic mandate that ignores financial gravity is a recipe for a systemic crash.
A crash that will hit the most vulnerable the hardest.
We have to find a way to balance our ideals without bankrupting our future.
Mark's story perfectly illustrates a concept we found in a fascinating thesis from Lund University regarding European banks. There's a general assumption in the corporate world that ESG metrics are a proxy for good management. The idea is, if a company has a high ESG score, it's safer, more responsible, and less risky.
Right, that's the whole sales pitch. Do good and do well. They go hand in hand.
But the Lund study, which analyzed banks from 2019 to 2023, found the exact opposite. They found a positive correlation between high ESG scores and a bank's contribution to systemic risk.
You're telling me the banks that were most obsessed with ESG were actually the ones adding the most danger to the entire financial system?
That's what the data showed. This is where the Lund University paper gets fascinatingly technical. They looked at things like the Z-score and SR-ISK.
Okay, let's translate that into English. What are we actually measuring here?
We're measuring how likely a bank is to implode if the market takes a big hit. The basic assumption is high ESG score equals responsible management, which equals a low chance of implosion.
Right. The logic is, if you care about the polar bears, you probably also care about your balance sheet.
But the data shows the correlation runs the other way. The banks with the highest social scores, in particular, often had the highest leverage and the thinnest capital buffers.
But why? Is it just incompetence? Or is something else going on?
The researchers suggest it's what they call a masking effect.
A masking effect.
If you're the CEO of a huge bank and you know your liquidity is shaky or you're over-leveraged in bad assets, what is the cheapest and fastest way to buy goodwill and distract regulators?
You launch a splashy new diversity initiative. You put out a press release about your carbon footprint.
Exactly. ESG acts as a kind of a virtue shield. Regulators and investors get distracted by the shiny virtue metrics, and they stop looking as closely at the boring old solvency metrics.
It's a magician's trick. Look at my left hand waving the ESG flag so you don't notice my right hand lighting the balance sheet on fire.
It's the falling door problem all over again. If the aerospace meeting's about demographics, it's not about the wing spar. If the bank's board meeting is about carbon footprints, it's not about credit default swaps.
And that leads us directly to the report from the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
The central bank for central banks.
Right. And they introduced two incredibly important economic concepts here: green bubbles and brown vortices.
These sound like sci-fi terms, but I have a feeling they have a very real impact on my 401k.
A green bubble occurs when capital floods into assets not because of their economic fundamentals like profitability or cash flow, but because of ideological preference.
Like Mark in your story, being forced to pump money into green startups that weren't profitable.
When you have a massive amount of institutional money chasing a very limited number of approved green assets, what happens to their prices?
They detach from reality, they go to the moon. But what's the flip side? The brown vortex.
This is where it gets even more dangerous for the real economy. This is where capital is forcibly withdrawn from brown industries, oil, gas, heavy manufacturing, before we actually have viable replacements for them.
So we're starving the old economy before the new economy is ready to take the load.
And the BIS warns that this creates enormous transition risks. If you divest from energy companies too quickly, their assets become stranded. They can't get loans to maintain pipelines or explore new reserves.
And this is where we get the term greenflation.
Which sounds like a buzzword, but it hits your wallet directly. The BIS calls it a brown vortex. We starve the old economy, oil, gas, fertilizer, production of capital. We tell banks, don't lend to these guys.
So the oil company can't drill a new well. The fertilizer plant can't upgrade its machinery to be more efficient.
Right. So what happens to the supply of energy and food?
It goes down.
Has the demand gone down? Do we still need to heat our homes? Do we still need to grow food? So basic Econ 101. If supply drops and demand stays steady or even grows,
prices explode.
And who does that hurt the most? It doesn't hurt the ESG consultant making 6 figures in Manhattan.
No. It hurts the single mom trying to fill up her gas tank to get to her second job. It hurts the retiree on a fixed income buying groceries.
So this isn't just about saving the planet in the abstract. It's about a transition that is so poorly managed, it creates a cost of living crisis for the very people who can least afford it.
And that is the entropy in action. We are breaking the functioning energy system before we have built the replacement. We're jumping out of the airplane before we finish sewing the parachute.
And Mark, the analyst, mentioned watching the numbers turn red. That's the retirees' money. That's real people's life savings being vaporized because of a bureaucratic mandate that ignores reality.
This is the misallocation of resources we talked about in the intro. In a functioning market, capital flows to competence, to the companies that are most efficient at creating value.
But in an ESG-captured market, capital flows to compliance, to the companies that are best at filling out the paperwork and signaling the right virtues.
The A-Invest source also touched on regulatory uncertainty. It mentioned that the political polarization over these initiatives makes it impossible for companies to plan long-term.
That's the environment that defense contractors and banks are operating in. One administration pushes ESG mandates, the next one might ban them. How do you make a 10-year capital investment in that world? But the deeper issue, and the BIS paper really hammers this home, is that the financial system is decoupling from the real economy. The financial sector cannot drive the green transition alone.
You can't just print solar panels.
Exactly. If the real economy, the physics of energy production, the chemistry of fertilizer isn't there, simply moving money around on a spreadsheet doesn't solve climate change. It just creates massive financial instability.
So we have a military focusing on social engineering instead of lethality, and a financial system focusing on ideological compliance instead of profitability.
Which brings us to the source of these ideas, the factory where this civilizational entropy is being manufactured.
The universities.
This is arguably the most critical pillar because it is the upstream source of the other two. The officers in the Pentagon and the analysts on Wall Street, they all come from the same place.
Try to imagine the life of Sarah. She is a brilliant PhD candidate at an Ivy League university who recently shared her experience on a long-form podcast.
Okay.
Sarah spent her 20s navigating an academic environment where the pursuit of truth was, at best, secondary to the deconstruction of traditional norms.
Exhausting.
She described a culture where the very idea of merit, of objective achievement, was treated as a relic of oppression.
So excellence itself is suspect.
By the time she reached 35, she realized she had spent her most fertile years in this hyper-competitive, ideologically sterile bubble, a bubble that actively discouraged family formation as a bourgeois distraction.
Wow.
She looked around and saw a generation of elite minds who were technically proficient in abstract theory, but were culturally adrift. They lacked the shared norms required to build a stable community or even a home.
It's a poignant example of how the capture of our cognitive apparatus, as the sources call it, leads to a literal demographic decline.
As a creator who looks at these societal trends, I see Sarah's story as a warning. While it's vital to challenge old prejudices and strive for a more inclusive society,
Of course.
we must be careful not to dismantle the foundational structures, like merit and family, that allow a civilization to reproduce itself.
There is a deeply human cost to this competence crisis that goes far beyond spreadsheets and policy papers. It's about the quiet erosion of the future itself.
Sarah's experience is a textbook example of ideological capture, a concept that was detailed in the proceedings from the New College of Florida Symposium.
Right. And the symposium argued that universities have fundamentally shifted their core mission.
So,
They've moved away from seeking truth, which necessarily involves debate, skepticism, and empirical evidence, and moved toward social advocacy.
the conclusion is decided before the research begins.
And the numbers back this up in a shocking way. The New College source had a statistic about faculty political leanings. In 1969, about 44% of faculty identified as left-leaning.
So a plurality, but there was still some balance.
Yes. Today, the ratio is overwhelming. The source cites data showing 501,000 faculty identifying on the left versus only 87,000 on the right.
And in some departments, it's even more skewed, right?
In the humanities specifically, the ratio can be as high as 80 or 90 to 1.
So it's not just an echo chamber. It's a hermetically sealed ideological bubble.
It's a closed loop. And this leads directly to what the sources call the crisis of rigor.
A crisis of rigor.
When everyone in the room already agrees on the ideological conclusion, the quality of the scholarship just plummets. We see the rise of what one speaker called unrigorous dreck and word games.
Feels like critical theory or post-colonial studies that prioritize a political narrative over falsifiable facts.
And the students are voting with their feet. The data shows a massive sustained decline in humanities majors.
Because they realize it's a bad investment. Why go $250,000 into debt to learn what one source called fashionable nonsense?
When you can study STEM or business and actually get a job. Interesting. Even though student interest in these fields is collapsing, the bureaucracy supporting them is expanding exponentially.
This is where we need to talk about the horse analogy from the researcher Peter Turchin. This really blew my mind.
It's a brilliant historical comparison. Turchin looks at what happened to horses. For thousands of years, the horse was the primary worker of the global economy.
It was the engine of civilization.
Until the internal combustion engine arrived, technology made the horse obsolete almost overnight.
And the result was what he calls equine genocide. We went from 21 million horses in the US to about 3 million.
Now, Turchin applies the same logic to humans, specifically to the elite.
So what's the combustion engine for the elite?
It's our university system. We are overproducing credentialed elites. We are churning out thousands upon thousands of PhDs like Sarah in fields where there are virtually no jobs. This is elite overproduction.
Now, I want to challenge this idea for a second. We've always had lots of graduates. Why is elite overproduction suddenly a crisis now? Isn't having a more educated population a good thing?
But only if the economy can absorb them into roles that match their expectations. Turchin's point isn't about the number of graduates, it's about the expectations gap.
Cat.
If you spend 8 years getting a PhD in, say, 18th century French poetry, you have been trained and you have been told that you are going to be a professor, a knower, a member of the intellectual elite.
Right.
But there are only 10 tenure track jobs in that field in the entire country this year.
It's a game of musical chairs.
It's a game of musical chairs with 1,000 players in one chair. When the music stops, 999 people are left standing. They're smart, they're articulate, they're credentialed, and they are furious. They feel the system lied to them.
And a smart, furious person with a PhD and a lot of time on their hands is a very dangerous thing for a stable society.
They don't just go get a job as a barista and forget about it. They use their credentials to burrow into the system and create new layers of bureaucracy where they can have power.
So if they can't teach history?
They become the dean of student safety and inclusive excellence. And once they're in that administrative role, they need to justify their existence.
Which explains the incremental outrageousness that was mentioned in the new college transcripts. To keep your job as a DEI dean, you have to constantly find a new thing to be outraged about. You have to push the ideology further and further.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of critical plagiarism theory that was mentioned. When the president of a major university, the example given was Claudine Gay, was caught plagiarizing dozens of times.
Right.
The defense from her supporters wasn't, she didn't do it. The defense was that the very act of accusing her of plagiarism was a weapon of the oppressor, a tool of white supremacy.
That is the 2 + 2 = 5 moment.
It is the explicit rejection of objective standards. In this case, don't steal other people's work, in favor of a narrative based on power dynamics.
And what does this do to the students who are watching all this?
It creates what the sources call the therapeutic state. The university ceases to be a place of intellectual challenge and becomes a place of emotional coddling. It treats students not as adults to be challenged, but as fragile patients to be protected.
Safetyism.
Yes, the revocation of adulthood. If you protect students from every uncomfortable idea, every challenge to their worldview, you produce graduates who are utterly incapable of functioning in a reality that doesn't care about their feelings.
And you get engineers who care more about their feelings than about physics.
Which brings us full circle right back to the door plug blowing off the plane.
It all connects. The university produces the fragile, ideologically captured elite. That elite then enters the military and finance. They implement the policies that degrade competence.
And eventually, the systems break.
Yes. We've looked at the military, finance, and academia, and the pattern is identical in each one.
It really is civilizational entropy. Entropy is a concept from physics, right? It's the natural tendency of complex systems to move toward disorder and a low energy state.
It takes constant work, constant energy, and high competence to maintain order, to keep a jetliner in the air, or a global financial market stable, or a republic functioning.
And we are actively removing the energy. We are dissolving the standards, the very things that hold the structure together.
We're introducing what one source called corrosive inclusion. The idea that by declaring standards themselves to be a barrier, we can make things more fair.
But the system doesn't just become fairer, it collapses.
The military gives us the door plug and the wing spar competence, replaced by identity metrics.
Finance gives us the pension fund profitability, replaced by ideological compliance.
And academia gives us the university president, the pursuit of truth, replaced by social advocacy.
And the scariest part of all this is who ultimately pays the price. The sources talk about the concept of luxury beliefs.
What's a luxury belief?
It's an idea or an opinion that confers status on the upper class while inflicting a cost on the lower classes. The elites who push these policies, the university presidents, the BlackRock executives, they are insulated from the consequences.
They fly private, they have private doctors. If the public school system fails, their kids are in private school.
They have a workaround, but the middle and working classes don't.
Oh. Elias, the soldier who quit, he loses his family's legacy. Mark's retirees lose their life savings. The passengers on the plane lose their lives.
The cost of civilizational entropy is outsourced to the very people who actually rely on these systems to work properly.
One of the sources, the one from New College, used a phrase that really stuck with me, the fading light.
It's a somber phrase.
It suggests that these institutions might be beyond the point of repair, that the rot is too deep to fix from within.
It's a distinct possibility. When an institution's incentive structure is fully captured, when you get fired for being competent, but promoted for being compliant, it is incredibly difficult to reverse that flow. Turchin's historical analysis suggests we are in a very turbulent period where the old structures are failing.
So if the institutions are captured, what does this all mean? What do we do? The source material actually ends with a very specific directive. It's not about trying to fight a burning building from the inside.
No, it's about something else entirely. It's about preservation.
The mission now is not necessarily to reclaim the captured citadels, but to become watchmen in the twilight, to build parallel institutions, to preserve the scientific method, the logic of engineering, and the classical texts like seeds for a long winter. In a season where the institution demands that you believe that 2 + 2 = 5, the most radical act of rebellion, and the only way to save the future, is to calmly, clinically, and relentlessly state 2 + 2 = 4.
2 + 2 = 4.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.